Okay, guys, this is the great knowledge check answers. Just kind of go over this real fast. The causes of the Civil War. How did the Dred Scott decision and versus Sanford decision increase tensions between North and South prior to the Civil War? Well, the answer to that obviously is that it increased tensions because they said that Dred Scott is property and that slavery has to be determined through popular sovereignty north of that 3630 line. Remember, in the Missouri Compromise, they said that there is no slavery north of the 3630 unless you live in Missouri. However, the Supreme Court, with this decision, came in and said that slavery is allowed through popular sovereignty, meaning voting. They can vote now. So that overturned a lot of things. That created a lot of tensions between North and South. What amendment overturned the Dred Scott decision? That would be the 14th Amendment. Overturned that gave citizenship. So when the Civil War was over and the 14th Amendment finally got ratified, it was overturned it by giving citizenship to anyone, African American, any citizen born in the United States. How did Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe cause the Civil War? Well, this was a book outlining and got kind of highlighting the evils of and the atrocities of slavery, and hundreds of thousands of people got a hold of this book, and the word got out about it, and this is what made up people's minds which side that they were going to take, either pro-slavery or anti-slavery. What were the major points of the Compromise of 1850? Remember, 2-2. Two things for the North, two things for the South. The two things for the North would be California would be admitted as a free state. And the other two things for the South would be the fugitive slave law would be enacted, and popular sovereignty in the western states as well. Oh, I'm sorry. Two things for the North were they were going to ban slavery in Washington D.C., the slave trade in Washington D.C. in the state's capital, in the United States capital, and they were going to admit California as a free state. The two things for the South were that they were going to enact the fugitive slave law, which means they were going to return escaped slaves from the North to the South. Okay, and they were going to use popular sovereignty in the western states. What was the Kansas-Nebraska Act? You please use your notes for reference on that. Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for people to use popular sovereignty when the states were becoming states. Remember how a state becomes a state? So the Kansas-Nebraska Act ended up kind of answers number 6, which is the Bleeding Kansas, and pretty much border ruffians moved in, and a mini civil war broke out. What was the Missouri Compromise of 1820? The Missouri Compromise was Maine becoming a free state and Missouri becoming a slave state, balancing out the slave and free states in America and the power in Congress. What was one major effect of the Missouri Compromise? One major effect of the Missouri Compromise was no slavery north of the 3630. What was the fugitive slave law, and what did it force the North to do? We already kind of answered that. It obviously returned former escaped slaves from the North to the South, and it forced the North to return them. Bounty hunters would go out and search for them and return them to their owners in the South. How did the election of 1860 contribute to the outbreak of the Civil War? How did the election of 1860 contribute to the outbreak of the Civil War? This pretty much because of the Abraham Lincoln's views on anti-slavery. The South, as soon as Lincoln got elected, the South was like, "We're out of here," and so they seceded from the United States illegally, by the way. Starting with South Carolina, just like your rap says. How did the North view John Brown? Well, you viewed him as a hero and a model. How did the South view John Brown? Well, they looked at him as a villain. They looked at him as a terrorist. What were the first shots of the Civil War fired? Where? And that would be Fort Sumter. What was the significance of the Battle of Vicksburg? This pretty much cut the South in two, thus achieving the Anaconda Plan. The significance of the Battle of Gettysburg? Well, this enacted the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln finally wrote out the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves and allowing African Americans to join the military. Remember the movie Glory in the 54th Massachusetts. Where did the Civil War end? Appomattox Courthouse. What was the main point of the surrender? The main point of the surrender was that the horses would be returned, they would get food, and we would help rebuild the South. Explain why Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Kind of already talked about that, but Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation primarily. He didn't want to. First, let me go back. The border states. He did not want them. The border states were really key to him, and so he didn't want to anger them. So he did not emancipate them in the beginning of the Civil War. However, after the Civil War got started and Gettysburg went down with 50,000 people dying, he basically wanted to end the war and allowed for African Americans to enlist into the military. He needed to end it, is basically the main reason. Identify Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee is the general and commanding officer for the South. Ulysses S. Grant is the commanding officer for the North. Was eventually, took him a long time. And then identify Jefferson Davis, president of the South, elected when the South seceded. Identify Stonewall Jackson, was the commander for the South, for the Southern Confederates, and was very smart and stubborn and was not going to surrender. An incredible leader. So, identify the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Free citizen vote. Free African American slavery was 13th. 14th allowed them citizenship. 15th is the allowed African American men to vote. Women were not allowed to vote yet to the 19th Amendment. Describe the Reconstruction era. That is in your spiral. Please look at that. This is where for about 11 years, this is where the North stayed in the South, helped to rebuild, and also allowed for curfews, enforced curfews, strict guidelines to make sure that the South abided by this surrender, also freeing slaves as well too. What were the Black Codes and what was the intent of the Black Codes? This was obviously horrible, but this continued segregation, allowing for the South to have certain continuous slavery for the South. What was Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction? What he wanted. How did he want the South treated? Lincoln's plan was he wanted them. Please look at the definition for Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. There was a whole slide dedicated to that, so please reference that, please. What was the Radical Republicans' plan for Reconstruction? Well, they wanted to obviously punish them harshly. They wanted to, if possible, put them in jail or kill them, one of the two, or both. How did they want the South treated? Harshly. They wanted harsh treatments of the South. Define the Homestead Act, Dawes Act, Morrill Act. The Homestead Act allowed for land. Dawes Act got Indians property and land from them. The Morrill Act obviously was land grants given for colleges like Texas A&M. How did many former slaves become sharecroppers? Well, because they had to now lease property land from landowners, and the problem is they were always in a cycle of debt. So it was just another form of slavery. Hiram Rhodes Revels. Please use your flashcards for that. African American senator. And then what was the significance of the Civil Rights Act of 1866? Please reference that as well in your reconstruction spiral. Okay, guys, that's all I got for you. Hopefully this helped. Talk to you soon.